And we have San Jose Police Department Lieutenant Randy Torres, his first time presenting here. And Lieutenant, whenever you're ready to share your screen and audio, you can do so. There we go.
Hi, Juan. Thank you for the invitation. This is the first time I've presented, and I'm happy to be with a part of the group, part of the community, the District 5. District 5 is a part of the makeup of what the Foothill Division is what I have command in. And one of my watches, 3 lieutenants cover a day's worth of coverage for the day. So we go out with about 80 officers on my shift, and we are responding to a variety of calls, all based on priority, but inevitably we intend on getting to every call that comes in. So first, what I wanted to talk about is just a couple of the trends that we're seeing locally that's kind of a little bit upsetting, or we're not used to seeing the numbers that we are nowadays. But as we go post-COVID and a lot of people are coming out, we're starting to see a trend in a lot of these crimes. First and foremost, let me talk about the homicides. We've had a couple homicides over the last month, and during that time, I think 3 of them were within our district. K. Walker was one of them, K. Walker Lane. That was a weapons involved. Officers responded to that scene, and unfortunately, due to the wounds, they were able to determine that it was a homicide there and then. That one's still working, and if there's any information, San Jose Homicide is the unit to call on that. Detectives are more than willing to take any information that might provide a lead to a suspect or furtherance of the investigation. The next was on Glen Keats. That would happen probably about a month ago, if you recall. That one was over a catalytic converter, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But that one's a little bit disturbing just because it was a homeowner that walked out on a suspicious activity involving his vehicle. And he ended up succumbing to his wounds there at the scene. And that one, again, is being worked by the homicide unit. And that was a little bit disturbing, just because it was not necessarily random, but it's just one of those things that's taken out of context. A homeowner walking out, and all of a sudden, a member of the family is lost. And then finally, last night, there was an additional one off of a Dumont Circle, which is also within our district, District 5. That one is fresh. It's still working. It was officers responded to a welfare check, determined that the victim that they were doing the welfare check on had wounds that were were life-threatening. They traumatic wounds that ended his life. I don't have much detail on that one, unfortunately. That one is still so fresh, but nonetheless, it was a little bit disturbing. With recent trends or recent crimes in the homicides, those are always difficult to palate. Going back to the Glen Keats, if you recall, what were the circumstances on that one? The homeowner went out and checked on suspicious activity that was around his vehicle. And what they were doing, the suspects or the subjects were cutting the catalytic converter out of the car. With catalytic converters, it was something a little bit novel to me. It was new. I didn't understand why they were cutting out or trying to get to these catalytic converters. And as it turns out, I looked up the numbers and the stats on those. The stats on catalytic converter theft is rising tremendously for this year specifically. Toyota Priuses are extremely vulnerable. First and foremost, I believe that's probably just because it's a light vehicle. It's easy to manipulate with the few tools, get up off the air, get underneath there. But more importantly and more significant is that the catalytic converter for that unit specifically is very valuable to somebody with malintent, obviously. So those catalytic converters are taken, they're broken down, and what they are valuable for is the metals that are inside. Those metals are taken, they're distributed. I can't say how specifically. I don't know how specifically, but I know that they're worth up to $1,000 just for the metals. And it's unfortunate because to replace that unit, you can potentially spend up to $2,500, if not more, up to $5,000 is what my notes are saying on some of those catalytic converter replacement. And then you have to take into account whether or not the vehicle is worth that much. So it just creates a lot of distress and a lot of unwanted need for families for those catalytic converter thefts. So with that, just there are some conversion kits that are available. Muffler shops are doing a little bit of work right now, starting to dig into what's becoming a problem for them as well. You can modify the undercarriage to weld the catalytic converters in place, which makes it more difficult for somebody to get it out. Another new idea that I was kind of surprised by, not surprised, let me take that back. I would never have thought of this idea, is to etch, engrave, or weld the license plate number onto that actual catalytic converter, and that will deter a potential theft. Also makes it easier or possible now to track that unit with no social or no serial numbers on those specific units. It's extremely, if not impossible, to track to a specific case. Officers are stepping up patrols on those, and I know that one specifically, a request was made to take a look at a neighborhood because of one of our residents' catalytic converter was taken. Officers did their due diligence. We're out there scouring, looking for suspicious vehicles, looking for poachers, if you will, and they spotted a vehicle, took the vehicle, and they made the car stop on the vehicle, and through investigation, they determined that many burglary type tools, cutting tools were in there, and the subject didn't have any reason to be there. So he was arrested for the burglary tools, and we highly suspect that he was out there. But what I'm trying to get to is that officers recognize this significant trend, this new trend, and are doing what they what they're responsible for in protecting the property and the welfare of our citizens. To continue with trends, additional trends that we're seeing is we're seeing a lot of ghost guns out there. The Glock ghost guns, or they're not Glocks actually, they're just parts. They're made from, I believe, for the Glock. They're conversions, and they are perfectly functionable firearms, and they have no serial numbers. So they are extremely difficult to track without any identifiers, anything that comes back to a trail of who should be owning that firearm. Ballistically, they can be tracked, but ballistically you can also manipulate, or you can change the parts on that ghost gun to change the signature of the ballistics on that as well. So officers are stepping up patrols, and we're seeing a lot of that, unfortunately. But to continue with trends, carjackings are still they're up, unfortunately, for the year. There is an event that was working within our district where we did end up taking 3 suspects into custody about a month ago. So that was actually very rewarding to see the hard work of the officers. I think I'm bouncing around now, but let me go back to some additional tips that we outlined and discussed for the catalytic converter. So for protections on the catalytic converter, for the manipulations on the modifications on the underside of the vehicle, additionally, things that you could do or should do if you have the means is consider surveillance cameras. Surveillance cameras are extremely efficient nowadays. They pick up low light, they pick up a lot of movement, and they are a wonderful tool for officers to use for crime prevention. Detectives use that all the time for their cases, and I can't tell you how many times a case is broken simply by the surveillance camera video. It will help protect your vehicle, but additionally, you can park it in a locked facility, in your garage if you can, in a gated facility if you have the means to do that. Finally, in a well-lit area where you can see it, where a subject or a suspect would not want to manipulate a vehicle, where he will likely be detected. Those small things will help and protect the vehicles and the owners of those vehicles. And we are working on this number. We're trying to get that down because that was just plaguing us. And for me, it's just a little bit striking. I didn't understand it. I understand it better now. But thinking of how one could steal a catalytic converter so easily still boggles my mind. Finally, like I was saying earlier, park in a well-lit area. If you see some suspicious activity, I'm going to encourage everybody that's monitoring, or everybody that's here is watching, is just call 911. If there's a suspicious person in your area that you need, it's very dangerous to confront. I've seen plenty of cases where there's victimization because a homeowner, a citizen, a resident went out and confronted a subject that he felt was suspicious, and then it ended up in either an assault or even worse. I've seen worse, unfortunately. So avoid that. Call 911. Let our officers get out there. We prioritize the call. If we are working a significant event, if we are working an event that is manpower intensive, we will get to that call whenever we can. So the best thing for you to do is to recognize what the threat is, make a mental picture of it, be able to recall, identify, scribe it on, or write it down on a notepad or something for that activity. So when the officers arrive, at least you'll be able to provide them with something to look for. Monthly statistics, referring to those calls on suspicious persons that we want to call, we want our residents to be calling us about. Numbers for last month were probably about 207 suspicious calls that came in. 207 calls for service that we responded to, went to the neighborhoods, checked out the suspicious activity, checked out the suspicious person, and then also made the patrol checks, just actual visual deterrent. Not only are we doing that, but officers are continuing with the proactive activity. So the second line that comes in after the suspicious persons statistic that I was just referring to is the proactive stops. How many stops are we actually making on suspicious activities? That number was up. That number was up in district, not specifically District 5, but the Foothill Division. It was up to 700. So officers are still out there. They're making stops and trying to find these burglars and trying to find these ghost guns, and to try to minimize and deter crime. Finally, the last thing I wanted to talk about is the increase on violence on the Asian community. Officers are going out doing foot patrols in our communities for a very specific task of communicating with the Asian community and make sure that they understand, or excuse me, make sure that we all understand what's necessary to protect ourselves. We're looking to deter crime and looking to protect all of our citizens, not necessarily, and not only the Asians, but certainly we're making a very specific and direct effort. To finish up, burglaries are up, unfortunately, this year because of, I don't know that there is a reason, but commercial burglaries and residential burglaries are up. So not only within this district, but citywide. So for the numbers, I don't have the numbers specifically here, but I will tell you that we are going out with additional patrols, and our objectives are specifically to identify burglary suspects, maximize the efficiency on our investigations so we can conduct follow-up and continue to identify who these burglars are and who are responsible for the burglaries. That impacts all residents in San Jose. It's a terribly emotional and traumatic incident for the burglary. So again, if there's any activity that you would see or believe that is burglary related, call 911 and let the officers get out there. That's all I have for the presentation, Juan.
All right, thank you. Thank you for giving us all that information. And as you noted, some of this causes a lot of trauma to the community. So now we're ready for questions and answers. If you have a question, feel free to post it in the Q&A feature. I'll promote you to panelists so that you could pose a question or make the comment directly to the lieutenant. Now, is District 5 in the area that you're responsible for? It sounds like Foothill Division.
Yes, it is.
You have a piece of Foothill Division?
Well, District 5 is all within my division, but my division also extends north and south of District 5. But it's all in Foothill, yes.
Looks like we don't have any questions at this time. I'll go ahead and ask you about the sideshows. They continue,
Hmm.
Story in White and other locations. And I think I recall that there's going to be an effort to help address those in a better way. But I only recall that. Is that something that's happening, that there's a plan that the department is trying to get approval for in order to address the sideshows late at night?
Yes, and as a matter of fact, I believe that's going to go to City Council um, for finalization in terms of how we're going to not necessarily use patrol resources, but additional resources as well, outside agencies, to align also to make a concerted effort towards the racers. Racers are not only a problem for the east side, not necessarily just for Story White. They are citywide. Not only citywide, they go across the borders as well. Each city is individually plagued by these, and it's distressing. They take over the intersections, will stay there until addressed by some sort of law enforcement at some capacity. But what we're seeing is a lot of fireworks. We're seeing a lot of firearms, guns being shot in the air. So that makes it an additional unique tactical problem. Officers can't simply just go shoo them away if in fact there's that degree of threat. So to answer your question specifically, are things being worked on? Yes, they are. We made an aggressive effort over the last couple weekends with specialized units, our motors unit being a part of it, and I know that a lot of citations were issued. Not only, I can't say specifically because oftentimes the ones in the cars race away as we approach, but also there's an ordinance against being present during the sideshow. So being a participant, watching, being the audience. So I know that plenty of citations were issued there as well. Hopefully that makes an impact on the activity, but that is something that's continuously being worked. And I project probably within the next few weeks, I know that our captain was working on it specifically, and hopefully we'll be able to finalize a concerted effort to address this problem. And it's a plaguing issue.
Right, right. I live about 3/4 of a mile from Story and White, and I, along with others, hear it when it happens. And of course, everybody starts saying, "What's happening? It's happening again." So I know that there's a great concern about that. I want to thank you for taking the. Oh, looks like we've got a question. So, and the request is that I read it out loud. How is San Jose Police? How is the San Jose Police Department responding to calls regarding unhoused people and calls regarding encampments in public areas?
Oh, that's a good question, and that's a question that's probably not only answered by the police department. You know, it's a social issue. I think in the past we were probably a little bit more just addressing these issues and shooing people away. Now I think we realize that there is so much more involved with the continuing and the continued problem that our efforts now are not only with the police department, but they're also with those social branches that are available to us. You know that plenty of the mini houses are going up, and I know there's a new development right by the police department that's going up soon to get people off of the street and into some sort of housing until we can transition them themselves back onto their feet and into an independent living. So it's not a police problem. We're not arresting everybody that is called on. There is a trespass issue that we will address when it's specific to a private property. But for the most part, once it becomes a critical issue, a safety hazard, health hazard, we will make a concerted effort to go out, make the notifications to the residents of the encampments that this place is going to be cleaned up. We'll give them a few days to move out. Most of the residents are responsive, and they'll move. And so that it's not a police issue every time we do have to go and address one of these encampments.
So if I were to paraphrase, it sounds like you said there are calls from residents if there is an issue that's safety or health, then you will get involved and take the steps that you said?
Well, yes, but that's not a patrol officer's determination. I mean, what I'm talking about on the cleanup, the encampment cleanups, it's a big effort. We're looking at 20 or 10 to 20 officers that are assisting not only the cleanup crews to work their way through there, but when an encampment has become so embedded where it has become a health issue, that's when we will typically do our cleanups.
Oh, there we go. All right, thank you. It looks like that is the final question